Hi guys, my name is Stuart Harlan, KN4PMT. I'm in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and this is where I live. I live in the Chattanooga Valley, Red Bank proper to be exact. And if you can see through the trees there, that is a plateau right over there. So my rationale for trying the Bevflex system is all about dealing with obstructions. I live in a heavily wooded area. As you can see here, this is the back side of my lot, and I'm currently standing on a downhill slope of what is basically a bump in the topography here where I live. This is the termination box of the northwestern end of a 425 foot roughly oriented Bevflex wire. That is this is the northwestern end of it. Continues down through the woods there, and I'm doing an inspection today to kind of look over things because I had a failure. And it wasn't a failure of the system, it was nature doing its work. So first, I'd like to thank you for this wonderful system. It has worked really well, and give you a little outline of my setup here, and to maybe open up another use possibly for this system, because it's worked very well for me. Again, on the 400 foot wire, this is one of my support lines. I used trees and insulators to support the system. Sorry, I'm out of breath. This is a hill, a big hill. Okay, it continues onward through the woods, thickly wooded, lots of trees. When I put the system in, I worked to eliminate as much deadfall as possible. But as you can see, I still got a lot of problems, or a lot of challenges, I should say. Carrying on. Back to the southwestern end. I refer to that as the northwestern end because I think the walk addled my brains. But anyway, this particular line runs northeast and southwest. That end was the southwest where I started down there. And you can look at the lay of the land. I am on a downhill slope. That actually is where my property line ends, is at the peak of the hill there. That's the reason I am on this downhill side, to stay on the correct property lines. And as it continues towards the southwestern end, it slopes downward. So what you're seeing there is a downward slope, gradual slope. And I'm meeting the peak. The bump that I'm on, the hill, is roughly longer than it is wide, and this would be the long length, or the 400 foot length. And the reason I point that out is because both ends of this line is sloping away from what is what I'm calling center. By GPS it says it's center, but pretty close. This is one of my insulators. I just used what was recommended, the plastic electric fence supports. These have splits in the top of them, and I actually had to open that split just a little bit to accommodate the wire. It was not a problem at all. Used a bandsaw and just opened that little slit open up just a little bit so I wasn't crushing coax, getting it in the insulator. And you can see two support lines down that direction, moving back towards the center of the array. I did take some effort to make sure that the line was straight as possible, but it does meander. It's not completely straight. And some of these support trees are obviously not directly in line, but it is relatively straight over its length because of the support lines. And they've held up. They've held up pretty well. I was surprised. And this is one of the boxes, feed line box, combination box. I'm sorry, I can't remember what you refer to it as, but The wire to the right and to the left are aerials, and the other two wrapping around the tree are feed lines. So that'll give you an idea what that box is. Again, addle-brained. Lots of walking. And maybe some information that's a little bit more interesting. Where I'm standing here, according to my GPS, you might be able to make it out through the trees. That brown roof down there is my shack. That's actually a shop that's behind my home where my ham equipment is located. And the feed line box for the other leg is right there. This is a Bevflex 4X system, so it's a 4-way system. And the switch box is mounted on the other side of that tree. So from the switch box, the feed line and the control line are about 398 feet downhill to that rooftop. And I didn't go through the trouble of figuring out elevations, but it's a steep hill. It's pretty good ways down there. In fact, the top part of my transmitter antenna, which is a half-wave 80/40 inverted V, is in a tree about 65 feet off the ground, approximately 75 feet from the back of that building. So the top of the transmitter antenna is much lower than where we're standing now. So as you can see, I have a lot of hills and a lot of obstructions. Here's the mounting for my switch box, for the feed line control box. I know that the boxes that you guys supply with this system is relatively weatherproofed, but I wanted to add a little more, so that's the reason I built the enclosures, and they are open at the bottom. And again, that box over there is for the northwest southeast leg of the array, and it's well, not much, but it is somewhat shorter than the other wire. The interesting thing about this one is it is downsloped. The end terminates about where you see those ribbons. There's a termination box there. It continues to that box and then goes downhill. In total length, it's about 340 feet or so. I kept the downsloped end of that wire shorter to stay outside the 50-foot radius of the transmitter wires. And it is all downhill. And I'm going to report that there is some very slight difference in reception, but far less than I expected. I really didn't know if this wire would even be useful compared to the big antenna, but it actually is, and it does exactly what you guys advertise. It takes the noise levels way down, and I'm able to pick out signals that I wouldn't otherwise pick out, even at the bottom of that hill. Now, I am not an engineer. You guys are. Maybe you can tell me, but obviously elevation, obstructions, and those kinds of things play a factor. But the 400-foot wire has a little better reception overall, especially on the northeastern end, and that's just my ear telling me that. But I don't know if that's a reason for the length of the antenna, because I do use it mainly for 40 and 80, or the fact that it's so much higher than what this wire does. But I thought it might be interesting to people that are researching this to know that even with all of this, I'm hanging it about 8 foot off the ground, slightly higher than that in areas. It is by no means exact. It does meander up and down and right and left, but it definitely works in reception very, very, very well. And in fact, I use it as an RX primarily, most of the time. Again, more trees. That's entertainment, right? This is looking northeast on the northeastern leg of the 400-foot wire. It's a little more than that, I think. I've actually plotted it with GPS, so I'm sure those measurements aren't exact, but it's somewhere around 400 feet. And as you can see, it goes off into the trees, down into the thickness. There's a termination box down there. Pretty good ways. I've already walked it, I've already looked at it. I'm not gonna walk it again. Down the hill now, and I wanted to give you a shot of this to maybe possibly get a little bit of appreciation of the slope here. I know it's really hard to do in video, but I'm standing on a slope that's about 38 degrees, I'd guess. It's, you know, I'm guessing. I don't have my compass. I couldn't tell you exactly, but it's not quite 45 and it's not quite 30, so it's somewhere in between, I'm guessing. You know, an uneducated guess, to be assured. And in the bottom down there, the wire continues as the ground flattens out. And the only thing I did is maintain that 8 feet off the ground as I went. And maybe not, through those 3 trees right there, you can see that the line is definitely not straight on this leg. And you might also see a problem. There's a definite sag there. And I'll show you why when we get down to the other end. Here's a look at the switch. I wanted to give you a look at the feed line and control lines as they pair up and move down the hill. And they move through the corner of where those 2 aerials, I guess you would say, meet and move down the hill. Now, I wasn't as strict with the supports on this, mainly because this area is far more open. I think you can see the shack down there, and didn't have as much support, so maintaining this might be a little more of a challenge. But as you see, the feed line is definitely not straight. I just grabbed places down through the woods that I could use for support, and you might see, let's see here, maybe not, you can see where that feed line takes a severe right as it moves down the hill. There's another big sag. And by now I'm sure you've guessed it. I wanted to give a hint to somebody that may be looking at this system. If you live in an area like where I live, invest in one of these. That's been invaluable so far this spring. You might need that. I wanted to give you a shot of what I'm calling a down wire, and this is a support wire that actually doesn't support anything. It actually holds the wire down as it levels out in this area. I noticed as I hung it through this portion, keeping it at that 8 feet pretty strictly. I'm somewhat of a perfectionist, that it necessitated using a rope above the wire, above the line, to actually hold it down. Of course, now no need for that. It's down, and yep, again, I'm sure you've guessed it. Okay, here we are. This is the southeastern end of the array, and that is a termination box without a wire in the bottom of it. So I'm sure by now you've figured it out. I haven't been able to determine whether a limb or a tree may have fallen. All of this is deadfall. It's old. It's been here a while. There's a pretty good cluster of limbs there, but none of that was laying on the wire. It's possible that it was tree movement, but given the distance and the kind of supports I used, I would be surprised if that's the case. I guess it could be. Probably as a precaution when I make repairs, I'll leave a little more slack just in case tree movement has done this. I actually thought the 400 foot, and this would be the 300 foot wire, I thought the 400 foot wire would probably be more susceptible to that, because I pulled a lot of slack out of that trying to hold it up off the ground. Tried not to tension too much, but I do have a couple of tensioners in that line, and I actually thought I would have problems with it before I did this one. This one was considerably looser, hung more loosely, and so I'm not really sure what happened here. I tend to believe that something hit the wire, limb probably, that caused it to come down, but I didn't find anything laying on the wire up the trail. But that's where I am, so I'll be ordering another termination box and putting this back together. And that's probably a design flaw of mine. It has nothing to do with the system, of course. I'm very, very happy with it. Would definitely do it again. And am enjoying it. So I'm definitely going to make repairs on this particular termination and get it up and going again. We're almost to the back of the shack now. Looking at the feed line and control line as it comes down through the woods, and it is hung on that tree, and there's a ground stake right there that I use for this end. As it goes into the shack, it goes back up and then goes into the back of the shack right there, and that's where it goes into the radio room. This particular stake, tree, whatever you like, is what I call a dolly line. I'm sure that's incorrect, but that's what I call a dolly line, and that actually holds up the transmitter. I don't know if you can see it up in there. That's it above us there. The balun up there is at about 60 feet, 65 feet, somewhere around in there. I set that line with the drone, incidentally. That was a lot of fun. And it's a 40-80, 80-40 inverted V, very sloppily hung in the trees, and you may not even be able to make that out, but it goes back off through the woods that way. And this end of the antenna is about 25 feet at the end of the antenna above the feed line, which I was worried was going to be an issue. In fact, this wire was actually located in a different place. Had to move it, lost a limb. And that's kind of the story of my life. I've got trees down everywhere on this property. That's one of the downsides to living on a hill. You get trees that come down. So I fully expected to have these issues with this system. Stringing wires through the woods is definitely going to be a challenge. I'm going to try to keep the system going as much as I can. It's really not that much of an effort to get in here and continue to clear, remove deadfall, and eventually I'll get to a point where I have some healthy trees around everything, and maybe it won't be as much of an issue in the future. But fully expected this. I'm going to be ordering another termination box to get that leg back up and running, and get it back going, because I've loved it. It's worked really great. I'm hearing signals that never heard before. As you can see, reception here, bit of an issue. There's a big one, big tree down over there that came down a couple of years ago. Okay guys, well, I want to say I appreciate it very much. This system is great. I love it. It's worked extraordinarily well, especially considering the topography I'm dealing with here. In relation to the big antenna, or what I'm referring to as the big antenna, is the transmitting wire. Signals, it's as you guys explain it. It reduces the noise level to such a degree that faint signals that I was just barely detecting on the other wire and on other antennas that I've made here. I have others, and it's a huge difference in being able to make the signal out and actually make the signal report to those guys. It's moved me up, it's stepped me up a level. In fact, I would, comparatively speaking, I know not everybody's into linear amplifiers, but this particular system was a step up that has been as effective as adding the amplifier to the system. It has worked on the receive end for certain. So guys, I appreciate it very much. You guys at Unified did a great job with this system, and I'm excited to see what you come up with in the future. If you guys are doing development, I want to hear about it for sure, and I'll keep in touch. 73 Gentlemen, K and 4 PMT.